It was the kind of wedding that a small southern town would remember for decades, not for its beauty, but for the shock that rippled through every pew in the church that day. The late summer air in Maple Hollow hung thick with humidity, the kind that clung to skin and made the perfume of the lilies stronger than it should have been. The church bells rang anyway, 3 slow, echoing chimes that rolled over the quiet streets lined with white fences and mailboxes wrapped in faded ribbons. Inside the church, hand fans fluttered like moths as neighbors craned their necks, waiting for the doors to open. When they finally did, the bride appeared. Ava Sinclair, 26, radiant, the kind of woman you'd expect to see stepping out of a magazine shoot rather than a chapel in rural Georgia. Her dress shimmered in soft satin ripples as she moved down the aisle, chin high, bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. Behind her, whispers rose like a breeze through the crowd. She's really doing it. God help her. She could have had anyone. And at the altar, waiting for her, was Noah Bennett. Noah wasn't the kind of man small towns wrote fairy tales about. He was enormous, over 500 pounds, his tuxedo straining at the buttons, his face slick with nervous sweat under the glowing lights. When he turned to face her, the entire church seemed to fall silent. It wasn't just his size that drew attention, but the way his eyes softened when he saw her, full of awe, disbelief, and a fragile kind of hope that made some people look away. Ava smiled, or at least something close to it. Her lips curved, but her eyes didn't follow. The pastor's voice echoed through the room, speaking of devotion, of forever, of 2 souls bound together by faith and love. A few guests nodded solemnly, but others traded glances, the kind that carried more curiosity than kindness. It wasn't lost on anyone that the town beauty was marrying the man everyone used to whisper about behind diner counters and at church potlucks. Still, they said the right words. They exchanged rings, his hand trembling as she slid the band onto his finger. Cameras flashed. Someone's phone buzzed. And just like that, Noah Bennett had married the woman he never thought would even look at him twice. The reception carried the same strange electricity, part celebration, part sideshow. The hall was draped in twinkling lights, and the air smelled of fried catfish and buttercream frosting. Ava laughed easily, swirling her champagne, dancing with her bridesmaids. Her smile was camera perfect. Meanwhile, Noah sat at the edge of the dance floor, clapping along, watching her every move as though afraid that if he blinked, she might vanish. When they did dance together, the room erupted in applause. Some cheers were genuine. Others were mocking. A few people recorded on their phones, short clips that would later appear online with captions like Beauty and the Beast, the real-life wedding. If no one noticed, he didn't show it. He only held her close, whispering something no one else could hear. She gave him a small, tight smile in return, the kind that didn't reach her eyes, and when the song ended, she stepped back just a little too quickly. By the time the cake was cut and the sparklers lit outside, the gossip had already started. Why did she marry him? Was it money? A bet? Some kind of pity? But inside the car waiting to take them to their honeymoon suite, Noah looked happier than he'd ever been. He waved to the crowd through the window, his cheeks flushed with pride. Ava leaned back against the seat, her expression unreadable, eyes fixed on the reflection of the sparklers dying out behind them. As they drove away, the laughter of the crowd faded into the warm night air. And though no one could have known it then, those wedding bells would echo in Maple Hollow for all the wrong reasons. Because within 48 hours, the same people who tossed rice and rose petals at the happy couple would be watching police cars race down that same street, their sirens cutting through the summer air toward a honeymoon suite that had gone eerily silent. And in that moment, everyone in Maple Hollow would realize that what looked like an unlikely love story had always been a tragedy waiting to happen. The honeymoon suite at the Willow and smelled faintly of roses and old air conditioning. A bouquet sat wilting on a nightstand beside a bottle of half-finished champagne. Outside, the cicadas buzzed their endless southern chorus, a reminder that life still went on, even when love was about to die quietly behind closed doors. At first, everything looked picture perfect. Ava Sinclair had changed into a silk nightgown the color of moonlight, her hair loose now, falling in effortless waves. Noah Bennett, exhausted, nervous, still flushed from the reception, fumbled with the champagne cork until it finally popped. The sound startled him, and she laughed, a light, musical laugh that might have sounded sweet to anyone else. But to Noah, it carried a faint edge, like the glint of glass beneath silk. They clinked their glasses, the bubbles fizzing between them. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal. Ava talked about the ceremony, about how hot the church had been, about how her makeup had nearly melted. Noah nodded, smiling awkwardly, agreeing with every word. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that would make her look at him the way she used to when she first agreed to marry him. But every time he opened his mouth, she filled the silence. When he leaned in to kiss her, she let him, briefly, before pulling away with a soft sigh. "Maybe we should get some rest," she said, already turning toward the mirror to wipe off her lipstick. Noah froze, halfway between hope and humiliation. He nodded again, pretending not to notice how quickly she'd retreated. The room felt colder then. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching her brush her hair, each stroke like a small reminder that she was beautiful, and he, in her eyes, was not. Later, after he drifted to sleep, Ava reached for her phone. The glow from the screen painted her face in pale blue light. Her thumbs moved quickly, tapping out messages to her best friend, Harper. "I can't believe this is my life now. He snores louder than a lawnmower. I swear he was sweating through his tux the entire night." Harper replied with laughing emojis and a quick, "You knew what you were signing up for." But Ava wasn't done. Her messages turned cruel, thoughtless stabs written in the comfort of privacy. "He can barely make it up the stairs without wheezing. God, how am I supposed to be attracted to this? He's not even really a man." She added more laughing emojis, the kind that twist a knife and make cruelty look like a joke. Across the room, Noah stirred. He wasn't asleep. Not really. His eyes opened to a slit, catching the faint reflection of her phone light in the mirror. He couldn't see the words, but he didn't need to. The tone of her laughter, the rhythm of her typing, the quiet giggles she tried to hide, they told him enough. He turned away, facing the wall, his heart pounding in his ears. The air felt heavier, thicker. Every breath came with the weight of something he couldn't name. Ava whispered something into her phone, a low chuckle following it. Then silence. She turned off the light, set her phone on the nightstand, and curled up under the sheets, her back to him. Noah lay awake for a long time, staring into the darkness. He could smell the faint perfume on her skin, feel the warmth radiating from her body, but she might as well have been 1,000 miles away. His mind wouldn't stop replaying the day, the glances from the guests, the whispers at the reception, the way the crowd laughed when they danced. And now, that same laughter lived in the room. It echoed off the walls, even though she was silent. He shifted his weight, the mattress creaking under him. For a moment, he thought about waking her, about asking, "Do you really love me?" But the question felt pathetic, too fragile to survive her answer. So he said nothing. Instead, he stared at the ceiling and listened to her breathing, steady, calm, unbothered, while the shame and anger inside him grew roots. In the stillness of that room, humiliation began to bloom. Quiet, invisible, deadly. And by morning, something in Noah Bennett, something that had once been gentle and hopeful, would never be the same again. The morning light crept through the thin curtains of the Willow Inn, painting long, pale lines across the bed where Ava Sinclair slept soundly. Noah Bennett sat awake long before the sun, hands clasped on his knees, staring at nothing. The room still smelled faintly of roses and sweat, reminders of a night that wasn't what anyone imagined a honeymoon should be. When Ava finally stirred, stretching lazily, she smiled at her reflection in the mirror before glancing at Noah. "You didn't sleep much," she said softly, her tone somewhere between concern and indifference. "I'm fine," he replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wasn't fine. He hadn't been fine since he heard her laughter hours earlier, muffled by a phone screen and words he would never unhear, even if he never read them. Ava slipped into a yellow sundress, tied a silk scarf around her hair, and posed in front of the mirror. "We should grab breakfast downstairs," she said cheerfully, adjusting her earrings. "I want to take a few pictures before it gets too hot." To Noah, she looked perfect and completely unreachable. In the dining room of the inn, sunlight spilled through lace curtains onto polished wooden tables. The smell of coffee and biscuits filled the air. Other guests glanced up when the newlyweds walked in. Whispers rippled softly, a wave of curiosity dressed as politeness. Ava beamed under their gaze, greeting the waitress like a celebrity meeting her fans. "Two mimosas, please," she said brightly, before turning to Noah. "And pancakes, right, honey?" He nodded, though his stomach turned at the thought of eating. He could feel the weight of every stare in the room, or maybe it was just in his head. Either way, it pressed down hard. Ava leaned close, her voice a whisper wrapped in sugar. "Relax, babe. People are staring because they're happy for us." But the smirk that followed told a different story. She reached for her phone before the food arrived, snapping selfies from the perfect angle. One where she shone, and he was barely in the frame. She posted the photo with a caption that read, "Honeymoon vibes, ring sparkles, sun." In the comments that followed, hearts and compliments flooded in. "You look stunning. Gorgeous couple." But only a few mentioned Noah, and those that did felt forced like polite afterthoughts. Meanwhile, in her private messages, Ava's tone was far less filtered. "Harper, how's the honeymoon, Mrs. Sinclair Bennett?" "Ava, girl, it's like living with a mountain that snores." "Harper, stop, your evil face with tears of joy." "Ava, if I have to listen to him breathe through his mouth one more night, I'm calling 911. She added a photo, cropped carefully to hide Noah's face. Across the table, Noah poked at his pancakes, each bite heavier than the last. He tried to meet her eyes, but she was too busy typing. Every now and then, she'd glance up, flash that practice smile, and return her phone. When the waitress came to refill their coffee, Ava leaned over and whispered something that made her laugh. Noah didn't catch the words, but the sound twisted in his chest. He muttered, "I'll be outside," and left the table. On the porch, the morning air felt cooler, quieter. A few townsfolk passed by, giving small nods of recognition. One old man smiled warmly. "Congratulations, son," he said. Noah tried to thank him, but his voice cracked halfway through. Inside, through the window, he could see Ava still laughing, not with him but about him. Her phone glowed in her hand like a tiny stage light, and she was the star of her own cruel performance. Back in their suite, the tension was thicker than before. Ava dropped her purse on the bed and sighed dramatically. "You know, if you're going to sulk all day, maybe we should have just stayed home." Noah turned slowly, his voice low. "I'm not sulking." She raised an eyebrow. "Then what are you doing?" He didn't answer. He didn't have words for the cocktail of shame and anger brewing inside him. Ava rolled her eyes, slipping off her shoes. "You're so sensitive, Noah. You got to learn to take a joke." But it wasn't a joke. Not anymore. He stood there watching her scroll through her phone, her reflection glowing in the mirror. Every tap of her thumb felt like another small betrayal. That night, when she laughed again, the same sharp, mocking sound that had haunted him since the wedding, something in him cracked further. She was texting, smiling at whatever her friend had written back when she caught him staring. "What?" she said lightly, tossing her hair. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He forced a weak smile. "Just tired." And though the room was filled with soft lamplight and the faint hum of the air conditioner, the space between them had never felt darker. Ava turned away, back to her phone, and Noah realized something he couldn't quite put into words, that love, or whatever was left of it, was slipping away. And in its place, something colder, heavier, was beginning to take root. The second night of their honeymoon began with the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. The laughter from the inn's bar had faded, replaced by the soft hum of an old air conditioner struggling against the heat. The air inside the honeymoon suite hung thick, almost suffocating. Ava Sinclair sat on the bed in a satin robe, her legs crossed, scrolling through her phone. The glow of the screen illuminated her face in pale blue light, while her husband, Noah Bennett, sat in the corner chair by the window. The lamp cast a warm, flickering circle around him, barely enough to cut through the shadows that seemed to grow thicker with every minute of silence. Noah had barely spoken all day. At breakfast, he'd forced a smile. At lunch, he'd stayed quiet. Now, hours later, his thoughts were spinning out of control, looping through every laugh, every whisper, every cruel glance that had trailed them since the wedding. He looked at her, at the woman he thought would save him from a lifetime of ridicule, and saw her thumbs flying across her phone again. The faint sound of her laughter, that soft, biting giggle, broke whatever calm he had left. "What's so funny?" he asked quietly. Ava didn't look up. "Nothing. Just Harper being Harper." Noah's voice was calm, but his knuckles whitened against the armrest. "You've been on that phone all day." "Yeah? And you've been sulking all day?" she snapped, finally looking up, her tone dripping with irritation. "Can we not do this? I'm tired." He stared at her, his eyes glistening with something between anger and heartbreak. "You said you loved me." Ava groaned, tossing the phone onto the bed. "Oh my God, Noah, not this again. Why do you have to make everything so dramatic?" He stood slowly, his large frame casting a long shadow across the room. "I just want to understand what changed." Her laughter was sharp this time. "Nothing changed. I just didn't realize you were going to be so needy." The word hit him like a punch. "Needy?" he repeated. "Yeah," she said, standing up, crossing her arms. "You cling, you pout, you act like a child every time I'm not staring at you. It's exhausting." His jaw clenched. "I'm sorry I embarrass you." Ava rolled her eyes. "Don't start with that guilt trip nonsense. You're not a victim here. You're my husband. Try acting like it." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Outside, a storm was gathering, distant thunder rolling over the hills, but the real storm was already brewing inside that small room. Ava sighed, sitting back on the bed. "You know what? I think I'm going to call Harper. Maybe talk to someone who actually knows how to have a normal conversation." As she reached for her phone, Noah stepped forward, blocking her view. "Please," he said softly, his voice trembling. "Just talk to me." She looked up, annoyed. "Move, Noah." He didn't. Her irritation turned to disdain. "You're unbelievable." He flinched at the word. He'd spent most of his life being laughed at, in high school, in public, even at work, but hearing it from her, the one person he thought saw something more, burned deeper than all the rest. "You shouldn't talk to me like that," he whispered. "Or what?" she sneered. "You'll cry." Her laughter this time wasn't the soft, careless kind. It was cruel, deliberate. Noah took a step back. The thunder outside cracked loudly, shaking the windows. Ava jumped slightly, then smirked. "Wow, even God's warning me, huh?" He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. When she finally lay down, rolling on her side, she muttered, "Turn off the light, will you? And try not to snore this time." He turned the lamp off. The room plunged into darkness, save for the dim orange glow from the parking lot light filtering through the curtains. He could hear her breathing, slow, steady, careless. He sat back in the chair, his mind unraveling. The storm outside grew louder, raindrops slapping against the window pane. Lightning flashed, illuminating her face for a brief second. Peaceful, almost angelic in sleep. But Noah didn't see peace. He saw mockery. He heard her laughter again, echoing in his head, each memory louder than the one before. "She laughed at you. She never wanted you. You were just a joke." The voices in his head wouldn't stop. He pressed his palms against his temples, rocking slightly, trying to drown them out. Then her phone buzzed. Once, twice. A new message notification lit up the screen. He glanced at it. He couldn't help himself. "Harper, you still alive?" Faced with tears of joy. "Ava, barely. He's sleeping like a bear. Can't believe I married this." Noah froze. The words seared into him. His breathing quickened. His heart pounded in his chest. His vision tunneled. He stood up slowly, the floor creaking beneath his weight. His hands shook as he looked down at her. For a moment, he whispered to himself, "Don't." But then she stirred, half asleep, mumbling something under her breath, his name, followed by a small laugh. That was the breaking point. The rage didn't come all at once. It rose like a tide, steady, unstoppable, until it consumed every bit of logic left in him. He knelt beside her, tears mixing with sweat, his hands trembling above her throat. For a fleeting second, he hesitated. She looked so small, so harmless. But then the words echoed again, not even a real man, and the darkness inside him took over. As the rain poured harder outside, the honeymoon suite filled with the sounds of struggle, of muffled gasps, of sheets twisting beneath desperate hands. And when it was over, the storm outside raged on, indifferent, relentless, while inside, a love story that had begun in public spectacle ended in silence. A silence that would soon shake the entire town of Maple Hollow. Morning came slow and heavy over Maple Hollow. The sky was pale gray, the kind of quiet light that makes everything feel unreal. At the Willow Inn, a housekeeper named Marjorie Tate pushed her cart down the hall, humming softly as she knocked on doors. Room 207, the honeymoon suite, was supposed to be empty by noon checkout. She knocked once. Housekeeping. No answer. She waited a moment, frowned, and knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. From inside, silence. No footsteps, no voices, just the hum of the air conditioner. Marjorie hesitated. Newlyweds, she thought. Maybe they were just sleeping in. But as she turned to leave, she noticed something odd. The faint scent of wilted roses mixed with something stale, something heavy in the air seeping out from under the door. Her knuckles hovered above the wood for a third knock. Then she decided to use her key. The door creaked open. The first thing she saw was the bouquet, roses drooping in a vase by the window. The second thing she saw was the bed, sheets neatly pulled up, and for half a heartbeat, she thought the bride was just sleeping, curled under the blanket with her hair fanned across the pillow. Then she saw the color of her skin. Marjorie gasped and stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh, dear God! Across the room, sitting motionless in the corner chair, was Noah Bennett. His massive body hunched forward, elbows on his knees, his hands covering his face. He didn't look up when she screamed. He didn't move at all. Within minutes, the front desk clerk called 911. The local sheriff's department arrived first, followed by county detectives. Red and blue lights painted the white walls of the inn's narrow hallway as curious guests peered from doorways, whispering to each other. Something happened in there. It's the newlyweds. I heard screaming. Inside room 207, Detective Dana Morales took one slow look around. The scene was eerily still. No sign of forced entry. No broken glass. No overturned furniture. Jewelry still on the dresser. Cash untouched. The only disorder was on the bed. Sheets twisted, a pillow on the floor, faint scratch marks on the headboard. The bride's gown hung neatly over a chair. Her phone rested on a nightstand, screen black but smudged with fingerprints. Dana knelt beside the bed, her expression unreadable. Bruising around the neck, she murmured to the coroner. Petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes. She fought back. She stood and turned toward Noah. Mr. Bennett, she said gently, we need to talk. He didn't look up. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to. What happened? She laughed at me, he said, trembling. She laughed at me, and I just wanted her to stop. The room fell silent except for the steady hum of the ceiling vent. Dana exchanged a glance with her partner, Officer Reeves, then nodded toward the hallway. Get him out of here, she said quietly. Read him his rights. As deputies led Noah away, the crowd outside erupted in murmurs. Some cried. Some recorded on their phones. By the time the police car pulled away, the first shaky videos were already online. Hashtag spreading like wildfire. Hashtag honeymoon horror. Hashtag 500lb groom. Hashtag justice for Ava. Back inside the suite, Dana began the meticulous process of piecing together the story. The phone was the first clue. When investigators unlocked it, they found a series of late-night messages between Ava and her friend Harper. Cruel jokes, mocking comments about Noah's body, and the now infamous line. He's not even a real man. Just 500 pounds of embarrassment. The timestamps were damning. The last message had been sent less than an hour before her death. Dana exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. She'd seen plenty of domestic cases before, but this one was different. The humiliation, the the public spectacle, the way the entire town had turned their wedding into entertainment. It all bled into the crime scene. When a medical examiner finished, the report was clear: manual strangulation. No drugs, no alcohol, no accident. Outside, rain began to fall, a slow, mournful drizzle. Reporters had already gathered at the end of the driveway, their microphones glowing beneath umbrellas. One of the deputies stepped beside Dana. "You think it was planned?" She shook her head. "No, this was rage." He broke under it. The deputy frowned. "Still doesn't make it right." "No," Dana said quietly, watching the coroner's van pull away with Ava's body. "It doesn't make it right, but it sure makes it tragic." By evening, the small town of Maple Hollow had turned into a media circus. Satellite trucks lined the street outside the sheriff's office. Reporters shouted questions as Noah was led inside in handcuffs, his head bowed, face pale, lips moving in silent prayer or regret. "He didn't run," one deputy told a reporter. "He didn't fight. He just kept saying the same thing. She laughed at me. I just wanted her to stop." As the cameras rolled and the rain poured harder, Detective Dana Morales stood under the awning, staring out at the chaos. She didn't see a monster. She saw two people destroyed by cruelty, one dead, one broken, in a town that had watched their downfall like a show. And for the first time that day, she whispered to herself, "This isn't just a murder. It's what happens when humiliation festers too long." By the time the trial began, Maple Hollow was no longer just a small southern town. It had become a symbol. Every news outlet in the country had a headline about the 500-pound groom who strangled his bride after 48 hours of marriage. Some framed it as a story of cruelty and humiliation, others as a tragedy of rage and broken pride. But when the courthouse doors finally opened, it was no longer about gossip. It was about justice. The old brick courthouse couldn't contain the crowd that morning. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder on the steps, microphones poised like spears. Satellite trucks idled in the square, engines humming under the August sun. Inside, the wooden benches overflowed with locals, their faces tight with curiosity and judgment. At the front of the courtroom, Assistant District Attorney Rachel Kim straightened her blazer, her expression sharp, deliberate. She had tried violent men before, but this case was different. It wasn't about robbery or revenge or greed. It was about words turned to weapons. Across the aisle sat Noah Bennett, dressed in an ill-fitting suit that strained across his frame. His wrists were shackled loosely, but his shoulders were slumped, as if the weight of the world and of what he'd done had crushed him long before the trial even started. When the bailiff called the court to order, the murmur died instantly. Judge Thomas Weaver entered, his voice steady but grave. "This court will now hear the state of Georgia versus Noah Bennett, charged with the second-degree murder of Ava Sinclair Bennett." Rachel Kim rose first, her voice ringing clear. 2 days after saying "I do," the defendant wrapped his hands around his wife's neck and took her life. There was no break-in, no intruder, no accident, only rage, pure, deliberate, and deadly. This was not love. This was control. This was violence. As she spoke, she gestured to the enlarged photos displayed on the screen beside her. Images of the honeymoon suite, the twisted bedsheets, the bruising on Ava's neck, the scratches on Noah's arms. The jurors flinched at the sight. Rachel continued. "He claims he was humiliated. That words made him snap. But humiliation doesn't give you the right to kill. Marriage doesn't give you ownership. This woman, this victim, was mocked in life, and now people are trying to mock her in death by excusing the man who murdered her." A hush fell over the courtroom. Ava's parents sat in the front row, her mother gripping a framed wedding photo so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Her father's jaw was locked, his eyes fixed on Noah, cold and unblinking. When the prosecution rested, the defense attorney, Leon Price, rose slowly. His tone was calm, almost sorrowful. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, no one is denying that my client caused Ava Bennett's death. But before you condemn him, you must understand why. For years, Noah lived as a punchline, a man mocked for his body, his voice, his very existence. He thought he had finally found love, acceptance, and peace. Instead, he found cruelty, the kind that cuts deeper than any blade. He paused, letting the silence settle before continuing. The messages Ava sent in the hours before her death were not just words. They were daggers. She called him a 500-pound mistake. She laughed at him to her friends. She reduced him to an object of shame. And when he broke, it wasn't out of hatred. It was out of pain. He gestured toward Noah, who sat trembling, eyes red, lips pressed tight. He is not a monster. He is a man who was pushed too far. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, half sympathy, half outrage. The defense called their witnesses. A psychologist testified about emotional abuse and the effects of long-term humiliation. For someone with deep insecurities, she said, relentless ridicule from a loved one can trigger uncontrollable emotional responses. But under cross-examination, Rachel Kim's voice cut like glass. Doctor, are you suggesting that being insulted justifies murder? The psychologist hesitated. No, of course not. Thank you. No further questions. Rachel turned to the jury, her eyes fierce. Words can hurt, but hands can kill. The gallery stirred again, whispers echoing off the wood-paneled walls. When Harper Lane, Ava's best friend, took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. She clutched a tissue, voice shaking as she recounted the last conversation they had. She was joking, but she didn't mean it. She was frustrated, maybe scared, but she didn't deserve to die for it. Her voice broke on the last sentence. Ava's mother sobbed softly in the front row. Throughout the testimony, Noah never looked up. He just sat there, head bowed, tears running down his cheeks. When it was his turn to speak, he stood slowly, voice trembling. I loved her. God knows I did. I couldn't take it anymore. She laughed, and I felt something inside me break. I thought if I made her stop, everything would go quiet again. I didn't want to kill her. I just wanted it to stop. He buried his face in his hands. I didn't mean it, he whispered. I swear I didn't mean it. Rachel Kim rose once more. You meant enough to keep squeezing, she said coldly. You meant enough to watch her die. The words hung in the air, slicing through the courtroom like a blade. By the time the gavel struck that afternoon, the crowd outside was already shouting. Hashtag Justice for Ava trended on Twitter. Talk shows called it the courtroom of shame. Some saw Noah as a victim of mockery. Others saw him as a man who turned humiliation into horror. But inside those four walls, there was only one truth left to decide, whether his pain excused his violence or whether love, once twisted by shame, could ever be called love at all. The courthouse in Maple Hollow had never seen this much tension. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath as the jury filed back into the courtroom. It was late afternoon. Sunlight cut through the tall windows in sharp golden beams, settling on the faces of the 12 men and women who had spent 2 long days debating the fate of Noah Bennett. Outside, the square was packed. News vans, microphones, clusters of locals pressed against barricades. Inside, every pew was filled. The air felt thick with judgment, grief, and the low electric hum of anticipation. Noah sat at the defense table, hands folded tightly in his lap. His suit hung loose now. He'd lost weight in jail, his skin pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. His lawyer, Leon Price, leaned close, whispering something that sounded like, whatever happens, stay calm. Across the aisle, Ava Sinclair's parents clung to each other, faces hollow from weeks of sleepless nights. Her mother, Elaine, held the same wedding photo she'd carried through every hearing. The one of her daughter smiling beneath a veil, frozen in a happiness that now felt like mockery. When the bailiff announced the jury's return, a hush fell over the room, so complete that even the sound of the judge's gavel seemed too loud. Judge Thomas Weaver turned to the foreman. Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict? The woman stood, hands trembling slightly as she held a folded sheet of paper. Yes, Your Honor, we have. Please read it aloud. There was a pause, the kind that seemed to stretch for hours, and then the words that would echo across every news broadcast in America. We, the jury, find the defendant, Noah Bennett, guilty of second-degree murder. The sound that followed was indescribable. A sob, a gasp, a chorus of whispers rippling through the courtroom. Elaine Sinclair collapsed into her husband's arms, crying out, "Thank you, God, thank you." Noah closed his eyes. His lips moved as if in prayer, but no words came out. Leon Price put a hand on his shoulder, but the gesture fell flat. There was no comfort to give. Rachel Kim, the prosecutor, exhaled quietly, her jaw tightening as she looked toward Ava's family. Justice had been served, but it felt hollow. Nothing she could win in that courtroom would bring the bride back. Judge Weaver cleared his throat, voice steady. "Mr. Bennett, please rise for sentencing." Noah stood slowly. The floor creaked beneath his weight. "This court," Weaver began, "has considered the evidence, the testimony, and the tragedy that has unfolded before us. What happened in that honeymoon suite was an act of violence that stole a young woman's life and shattered two families in the process. The court recognizes your remorse, but remorse does not undo death." He paused, glancing at the defense table. "The sentence is 30 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 20. A faint murmur spread through the gallery, a mix of relief and disappointment. Some thought it too harsh. Others, not nearly enough. Noah's mother, seated in the second row, began to cry softly. Her sobs echoed through the stillness. Noah didn't turn to look. He stared straight ahead, his eyes vacant, his voice almost inaudible as he whispered, "I'm sorry." Elaine Sinclair rose suddenly, clutching the photo of her daughter. "She didn't deserve this," she shouted. "She just wanted to live." Deputies guided her gently back to her seat as the judge's gavel struck once, twice, restoring order. Reporters outside were already broadcasting live updates before the court even adjourned. The 500-pound groom sentenced to 30 years for the murder of his bride. Clips of Noah's bowed head played on repeat across every network. The same image that had become both tragedy and cautionary tale. As deputies shackled his wrists and led him from the room, flashes from cameras turned the hallway into a strobe of white light. Questions rained down. "Do you regret it, Noah? What do you want to say to her family? Was it really about humiliation?" He didn't answer any of them. He only said one thing, a soft, broken murmur that barely rose above the chaos. "I didn't mean it." It was the same phrase he had whispered the morning after the murder, the same words captured on the police recording. "I didn't mean it." That night, Maple Hollow was split in two. At the Sinclair home, candles burned beneath Ava's portrait. Neighbors gathered with flowers, their tears mixing with the soft hum of prayer. At the Bennett house, blinds stayed closed. Family members refused interviews, the phone ringing endlessly before going silent. And somewhere in between love and cruelty, shame and rage, a once-celebrated wedding had become a grim parable. Ava Sinclair was gone. Noah Bennett was caged. In a small town that once loved gossip had learned the price of its own laughter. In the weeks that followed the verdict, the story of Ava and Noah Bennett refused to fade. It spread beyond Maple Hollow, beyond Georgia, into national headlines, podcasts, and late-night talk shows. What had begun as a local tragedy became a nationwide debate about cruelty, shame, and the quiet violence that can grow behind smiles. On social media, hashtags still battled each other. Hashtag Justice for Ava and hashtag Push Too Far. Comment sections turned into war zones of opinion. Some called Noah a monster. Others, a victim of emotional abuse. But for those who actually lived in Maple Hollow, it wasn't about sides anymore. It was about silence, the kind that clings to a town after the sirens stop and the cameras leave. The Willow Inn, once known for its romantic getaways, shut down within months. Couples stopped booking the honeymoon suite. The owners boarded up the windows and hung a faded for sale sign out front. Locals said the place felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by the memory of a woman who had laughed her way into a nightmare. Detective Dana Morales returned to her normal rotation, but she was never quite the same. She'd been in homicide long enough to know that death didn't always come from knives or guns. It could start with words, with ridicule, with small cruelties that ate away at someone's soul. When reporters asked if she believed Noah's remorse, she answered simply, I believe he didn't plan it, but I also believe he chose it. She kept a photo from the crime scene on her desk, not of the body, but of the roses on the nightstand. Half dead, half alive. A reminder of how fast something beautiful could wither in the heat of contempt. For the Sinclair family, grief became a routine. Every morning, Elaine Sinclair visited the church where her daughter had walked down the aisle just 3 months earlier. The pastor had installed a small bronze plaque by the door, in loving memory of Ava Sinclair Bennett, gone too soon. Elaine would touch it gently before sitting in the front pew, whispering prayers she wasn't sure anyone was listening to. She later told a news crew, "My daughter wasn't perfect, but she was mine, and she didn't deserve to die for being cruel. No one does." Her husband, Martin, stayed mostly silent. He spent his evenings building a small garden behind their house, planting white roses in neat rows. He never said why, but neighbors noticed that he cut away every thorn before letting the flowers bloom. At the high school where Ava had once volunteered, a scholarship was founded in her name, the Ava Sinclair Memorial Grant. It was given each year to a student pursuing psychology or counseling to study how words shape people and how to heal from them. In the state penitentiary 2 hours away, Noah Bennett began his new life. He rarely spoke. The guard said he spent most of his days sitting on his bunk, staring at the floor, murmuring prayers under his breath. He'd lost more than 100 pounds in the first year, though no one could say whether it was from guilt or neglect. Inmates called him preacher because he quoted scripture sometimes, half-mumbled verses about forgiveness and judgment. But the irony wasn't lost on anyone. A man who had once been mocked for his size now existed in a place where cruelty was constant, where humiliation came daily. A chaplain who visited him weekly once asked, if you could say one thing to her, what would it be? Noah thought for a long time, then whispered, I wish she'd meant it when she said she loved me. And I wish I'd let her live long enough to mean it too. It was the closest thing to confession he ever gave. By the second anniversary of the murder, most of America had moved on. But Maple Hollow hadn't. At the annual candlelight vigil, the townspeople gathered outside the old church, holding white candles that flickered against the evening breeze. Detective Morales stood near the back, watching quietly as the pastor spoke. Love should build, not break. Words should heal, not harm. And silence in the face of cruelty is just another kind of violence. Elaine stepped forward to light the final candle. The flame trembled but didn't go out. When the crowd dispersed, the church bells rang again, slow, mournful, echoing through the same streets that had once hosted Ava's wedding procession. To outsiders, the story of the 500-pound groom had become another entry in the endless catalog of true crime tragedy. But to those who remembered it, the waitress who'd served them breakfast, the housekeeper who'd opened the door, the detective who'd seen the aftermath, it was something deeper. It was a warning. Because cruelty doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers behind a smile. Sometimes it hides in a joke or a text sent late at night. And sometimes it grows quietly until it explodes into violence that no one can take back. In the end, Ava Sinclair became a cautionary tale about how words can kill, and Noah Bennett, a living monument to what happens when love turns to humiliation and shame turns to rage. And in Maple Hollow, long after the headlines faded and the lights from the news vans disappeared, the people still remembered. Because every time the wedding bells rang again, someone always whispered, "Be careful what you say. You never know who's listening."